Every week, tune out of dispensational theological waste management and tune into Hearing the Truth, where we don't stack garbage on top of the truth. D.S. Ferris, nice to see you here again. Welcome to Hearing the Truth.
What's going on, man? Nice to see you this week for another important study. I like your intro. You are right. Here we don't play theological hopscotch. We don't dance between the raindrops. We don't dance on our tippy toes or walk on eggshells around the dispensational delusion to play the game of political correctness. The time for plain speech is now.
For several weeks now, we've discussed the Little Horn of Daniel 7 and the Little Horn of Daniel 8. It's very clear that the Catholic Church matches the description of the Little Horn in these chapters. So far, DS, you've laid a powerful foundation with all the identifying marks of the Little Horn. Moreover, the major time prophecies give us a blueprint by which we can visualize the workings of the Catholic Church in history.
Yes, that is correct. The time prophecies of the 2,300 years, the 70 weeks, and the 1,260 years demonstrate the historical blueprint by which all the identifying marks of Catholicism can be ascertained. And having laid this foundation, we are now ready to fill in more details concerning the great Antichrist power.
D.S., before you begin, would you give us an outline of what you're going to teach over the week so that we can keep everything in perspective?
Certainly. For the next few weeks, perhaps longer, we are going to spend some time discussing the system of the dragon. This is an in-depth study of paganism and how paganism laid the foundation for the system of Antichrist. In this study, we will ascertain the origins of the number 666. This study will, of course, enlarge on the meaning of the first phase of the abomination of desolation during the 1,260 years of the papal supremacy. In essence, we will see that the beast is the great dragon system of paganism in the form of Catholicism.
Okay, now last week in brevity, we discussed that there's two parts of the beast's rule and two parts of Babylon. When are we going to get into that study?
Mike, once we cover the system of the dragon, we are going to move into the prophecies concerning the second phase of the abomination of desolation. The second phase of the abomination of desolation takes place in the time frame of the beast that yet is, meaning the fully resurrected papacy. This is the time frame when God declares that Babylon is fallen the second time. You see, all the information that we have studied over the last 4 weeks will be enlarged by the present study. By the time we are done with the system of the dragon, we will have a tremendous foundation by which to clarify the fulfillment of the prophecies in our day and age.
Very good. I think we're ready to begin.
Then let us start with Revelation 12 and study the symbols in that chapter. We will begin with verses 1 through 5. Verse 1. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. 2. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. 3. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. 4. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. 5. She bore a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. Note this clearly. It is important to realize that the imagery of Revelation 12 is a depiction, in a nutshell, that reveals the whole controversy between good and evil expressed in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Revelation 12 uses the symbolism of the dragon or the serpent as a representation of the power of Satan, whereas the symbolism of the woman represents God's people in both Old and New Testament times. Now, let us examine the symbolism of the woman in Revelation 12 and clarify its meaning. In the Old Testament, the woman represented ancient Israel. See Isaiah 54:5, Jeremiah 3:14, Jeremiah 6:2, Jeremiah 31:32, and Hosea 2:19. The 12 stars represented the 12 patriarchs of Israel. Notice also in this prophecy that Israel was clothed with the sun. The sun is a symbol of light. God's glory is described as light. See John, these are some really good examples. See John chapter 1 verses 4 through 9, Psalm 36:9, Psalm 43:3, Psalm 90 verse 8, Psalm 104 verses 1 and 2, and Psalm 139:11. In Revelation 12, the sun is symbolically used to represent the glory and righteousness of Christ. Pertaining to Christ's second coming, Malachi 4:2 says, "But unto you that fear my name shall the Son," S-U-N, notice this, "shall the Son of righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall." Psalm 84:11 states, "For the Lord God is a sun and shield." So in other words, and looking at these symbols, Israel was to be clothed with the righteousness and glory of Christ. And Revelation 12 shows that Israel stood on the moon. Let us raise the question. What is the function of the moon? The moon reflects the light of the sun. The light of the moon is only a reflection of the greater light of the sun. Thus we can say that this symbol represents the Old Testament sacrificial system being a reflection of Christ himself. This is why Hebrews 10:1 says, "For the law having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of these things, can never with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers thereunto perfect." Israel stood on the foundation of the Old Covenant system, which was a form of the greater light that was revealed at the advent of Christ. That is why Hebrews 10:1 says that the law was a shadow of the things of Christ. Now, up to this point, we have discussed how the woman symbolizes ancient Israel in Old Testament times. Let us ask, what does the woman represent in New Testament times? The woman represents the church. After the kingdom was taken from national Israel, see Matthew 21:43, the woman of Revelation 12 became the church. The 12 stars represent the 12 apostles who promulgated the church of Jesus Christ. The church, like ancient Israel, is to be clothed with the sun, the righteousness and glory of Christ. 2 Corinthians 4:6 says, "For God who commanded the light to shine out of darkness hath shined in our hearts, to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." And the church also stands on the foundation of the moon, meaning the church has for its foundation the message of the Old Testament and the Messiah of Old Testament promises. This is why Paul said in Ephesians 2, verses 19 and 20, the following, "Now therefore you are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone."
D.S., this makes sense. The woman of Revelation 12 represents the covenant people of God in both the Old and New Testaments.
That's right. And let us ask for emphasis. Why does the symbolism of the woman in Revelation 12 highlight both ancient Israel and the church? Christ was married to Israel. See Isaiah 54:5, Jeremiah 3:14, Jeremiah 6:2, Jeremiah 31:32, Hosea 2:19. Let us underscore this. Christ was married to Israel. Christ is also married to the church. See Ephesians 5:23 through 33, 2 Corinthians 11:2, James 4:4, and Romans 7:1 through 4. Christ ultimately has one wife, not two, not three, as dispensationalists teach. The reason that the woman of Revelation 12 can be predicated to both ancient Israel and the church is because the saints of all ages are one people under the everlasting covenant. See Hebrews chapter 11.
D.S., having demonstrated that the woman of Revelation 12 represents the covenant people of God in both Testaments, it becomes clear that the work of the dragon is the work of Satan against God's people in the Old Testament and the New Testament.
That's right, Mike. That is exactly why we have to understand in detail what the dragon represents. By understanding the elements of the dragon in history, we can understand the warfare that has been waged against God's people in both Testaments. Let me put it to you this way. The system of the dragon is the system of Satan. It is the measuring stick of evil by which we identify the elements of false religions. Why is the sea beast of Revelation 13, meaning the same power as the little horn, so problematic? Because the beast received his seat and authority from the dragon. This will also hold true for the false prophet when we get into that study. By identifying the system of the dragon, we then know that when religions teach ideas that come from the dragon, they are the offspring of Satan's religious system.
I've noticed that in chapter 6 of Prophetic Tool Chest, you have 4 interpretations for the dragon of Revelation 12.
To be more precise, I have a 4-fold interpretation for the dragon of Revelation 12. In fact, I think we will begin at this point of analysis. I will use sections of chapter 6 to explain this issue along with other issues. Now, it is important to realize that the dragon represents different things. Revelation 12:9 calls the dragon the devil, which is true. However, the devil does not exist in an actual fleshly body of this nature. The 7-headed and 10-horned dragon represents 4 things. 1, he represents the 7 successive pagan empires. 2, he represents pagan Rome. 3, he represents papal Rome. And 4, he represents the system of paganism. Let us spend some time analyzing each of these points. Point number 1. The first interpretation is that the dragon represents 7 successive world empires. Revelation 12:3 tells us that the dragon has 7 heads and 7 crowns on the heads. Crowns in the Greek is diadem, and this means kingly crowns. These heads represent not 7 individual kings, but 7 kingdoms, which of course have a seat of authority where kings have ruled. The dragon with 7 heads in this perspective is a representation of Satan working through 7 successive kingdoms against God's people, the sun-clothed woman. Satan's first attempt to establish a one-world kingdom took place at the Tower of Babel. See Genesis chapters 10 and 11. Babel, in essence, was Satan's blueprint for all the major kingdoms that would come into existence. Satan created this blueprint because he knew that eventually God was going to establish an earthly representation of the heavenly kingdom, meaning the Israel of God. At the Tower of Babel, Satan began the process of developing his kingdom to thwart the soon-coming Israel of God. The first actual kingdom which followed the Tower of Babel was the kingdom of Egypt. During the time frame of Egyptian power, God had begun the process of establishing Israel through the offspring of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The kingdom of Egypt was Israel's first great persecutor. See Exodus chapters 1 through 15. Isaiah 11:16 indicates that Israel's first gathering was from Egypt. Then, in history, we learn that it was the Assyrians who dispersed the 10 northern tribes of Israel. After this dispersion, Neo-Babylon came into power and conquered Jerusalem. The Persian Empire was the next kingdom in line. Under this kingdom, the second gathering of Israel took place for the restoration of the temple and the city of Jerusalem. Look at the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. The books of Ezra and Nehemiah reveal that the Jews experienced much trouble accomplishing the restoration of their temple and city under Persian rule. When Greece came into power, Hellenism was the devil's tool to corrupt the Jews. B.G. Fernie reveals the following. He says, the fall of Persia before the all-conquering legions of Alexander made little difference in the political situation. The Jew cheerfully accepted the new ruler, indifferent whether Greek or Persian claimed suzerainty as long as he was left in peace to live his own life. There was, however, a social and philosophical result of Greek domination, which had a momentous effect. Alexander's policy was to plant Greek cities in conquered lands and till them with Greek colonists. Many were established in Palestine, and their influence soon made itself felt in the Jewish community. The Jew was susceptible to Greek thought and culture, which the strict adherents of the law perceived to be antagonistic to Hebrew civilization. Gradually, the conflict between Hellenism, the Greek philosophy, and Hebraism, the Jewish cult, began and continued through a long period. And that comes from B.J. Fernie, Ph.D., from Malachi to Matthew, and this is cited from H.M.S. Richards' Study Bible, page 7. Now, the Greeks, for a long period of time, sought to convert the Jews to paganism, and eventually the Jews were persecuted. In the same source just cited above on page 7, we read the following. The great crisis in the history of the Jewish people in Palestine came in 175 BC, when Antiochus Epiphanes became king of Syria. He determined not only on the complete subjugation of Palestine, but on rooting out Jewish faith and practice and making the Greek culture paramount throughout his empire. He captured Jerusalem and proceeded to desecrate the sacred places. An altar to the Greek deity Zeus was set up in the temple. Swine were offered in sacrifice, and their blood was sprinkled on the holy place. Now, after Greece's rule, Rome came into power. Rome, too, was an oppressor of the Jewish nation. It was under Roman power that Herod sought the life of Jesus when he was a baby. It was Roman power that crucified Jesus. It was Roman power that destroyed Jerusalem in 70 A.D. The iron strength of Rome was a rulership of great power and hard to contend with.
Yes, let's pause for a moment. Up to this point, it appears that 6 heads of the dragon are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. If we look at this issue chronologically, then it becomes clear that Babel was Satan's prototypical kingdom in preparation for the destruction of God's Israel. And then, during the span of the 6 kingdoms just mentioned, the serpent and dragon, Satan, worked through these powers to destroy Israel. So, Israel, being the Old Testament representation of the woman clothed with the sun, was persecuted by the dragon through these 6 kingdoms.
That's all correct.
And let me guess, DS, the 7th kingdom was the papacy.
Exactly. Let us take note again of Revelation 12, 3 through 6. Verse 3. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. 4. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven, and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. 5. She bore a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. 6. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now, let's talk about these verses. Verse 4 describes the doings of Herod the Great. Herod attempted to kill Jesus in his infancy. Verse 5 describes the ascension of Christ into heaven. After the death and ascension of Christ, the dragon continued to work through pagan Rome to destroy the church. Emperors like Nero and Diocletian sought to eliminate Christianity completely. Rome was a hard persecutor, but Satan's masterpiece of destruction against the church came through the 7th head kingdom, which was Papal Rome. And this persecution lasted for 1,260 years. The 1,260 days of Revelation 12 are identical to the 1,260 days of Daniel 7. It is conclusive in the first application of interpreting the dragon that it represents the devil persecuting God's people through the 7 successive kingdoms just named. Ancient Israel, meaning the sun-clothed woman, was persecuted by Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. The church, who is also the sun-clothed woman, was persecuted by Rome and Papal Rome. Now, the second interpretation of the dragon is that the dragon represents pagan Rome itself. This is the case as we view the part of the prophecy where the dragon attempted to kill Christ at his birth. Pagan Rome was in power during this time frame. Another important aspect of the prophecy is that the 7 heads can also represent the 7 hills of Rome. Many of the Protestant reformers applied the 7 mountains of Revelation 17:9 to the actual 7 hills of Rome. Interestingly, the New American Bible for Catholics in the footnotes of Revelation 17:9 says, quote, "Here is a clue, literally, here a mind that has wisdom, 7 hills of Rome." Isn't that amazing that the Catholic Bible actually identifies the 7 hills of Rome with the prophecy of Revelation 17:9. Now, different Bible interpreters have come to the conclusion that the 7 mountains are the same as the 7 kingdoms. It is more likely that this symbolism represents both the 7 kingdoms and the 7 hills. As we are seeing, these symbols don't represent one specific thing. They have dual or triple applications.
To me, it's apparent that the dragon with 10 horns looks like the fourth beast of Daniel 7, which also has 10 horns. The difference between Revelation 12 and Daniel 7 is that Revelation 12 repeats the symbolism of Daniel, but enlarges to include more detail, such as the 7 hills.
That is correct. Now, the third interpretation of the dragon is that he can also represent papal Rome. When we look at the dragon in the perspective of his 10 horns, we see a symbolical description of the devil working through both pagan Rome and papal Rome. The dragon who attempted to kill Christ at his birth describes the devil working through pagan Rome. Herod the Great, as a position of power, was simply a Roman jurisdiction. It was Roman soldiers who crucified Christ. See Luke 23, Mark 15, and Matthew 27. It was Rome that attempted to seal the tomb of Christ so that it could not be opened. See Matthew 27, verses 62 through 66. But as Revelation 12:5 says, the child was caught up unto God and to his throne. Satan failed to achieve his objective through Roman power. In this description, the dragon was the sixth head kingdom, which is Rome. As we discovered in the study of the little horn of Daniel 7, Rome eventually divided into 10 divisions. Thus, the 10 horns on the dragon are homogeneous with the 10 horns on Daniel's fourth beast. The dragon became the seventh head kingdom, papal Rome, after the fall of Rome, that is, pagan Rome, in 476 AD. For it was after this time that the Heruli, Vandals, and Ostrogoths were destroyed. Then, following the removal of the Ostrogoths, came the 1260 years of persecution under papal supremacy. Note this clearly. When we look at the time element of Revelation 12, the 1260 prophetic days, it becomes clear that the dragon also has an application to the papacy, for the definite time frame of 1260 years does not apply to pagan Rome or the kingdoms that came prior to its existence.
This is quite interesting, how the dragon represents different things. If we look at the dragon in perspective of the 7 heads, he can represent the 7 successive world kingdoms, which persecuted both ancient Israel and the church. If we look at the dragon in perspective of the 7 heads and his attempt to kill Christ, he can represent pagan Rome sitting on the 7 hills. If we look at the dragon in the perspective of his 10 horns, he can represent pagan Rome's breakup into the European nations. If we look at the dragon in perspective of the 1260 years, he can represent the Catholic Church, who caused the woman, the true church, to go into hiding. It's without doubt that God's given us plenty of avenues by which to identify Satan's agents in the great controversy between good and evil.
That's right. And now we can proceed to the fourth interpretation of the dragon, that this symbol represents the great religious system of sun worship. It is through this fourth interpretation that we unlock the secrets of the great deception and plan of Satan that has encompassed the 7 kingdoms. It is through this fourth interpretation that we unlock the secrets of the great deception and plan of Satan that found a permanent foundation in pagan Rome. It is through this fourth interpretation that we unlock the secrets of the great deception and plan of Satan that used papal Rome to accomplish the abomination of desolation. And it is through this fourth interpretation that we unlock the secrets of the great deception and plan of Satan that ultimately will accomplish the second phase of the abomination of desolation in our day and age. Why did God use the great red dragon with 7 heads in Revelation 12 to depict the 7 successive kingdoms of paganism? God used the symbolism of the 7-headed dragon because paganism actually has its beginnings in dragon or serpent worship. From the very beginning, the devil chose the serpent as a symbol of his power. Genesis 3 shows how the devil used the serpent to cause Adam and Eve to disobey God. The symbol of the serpent throughout history has been the icon of Satan's religious system. When Nimrod built the Tower of Babel, according to Genesis chapters 10 and 11, he built this tower as a prototypical one-world government in dedication to the great serpent power. Alexander Hislop, in his book The Two Babylons, explains that Nimrod went by the name of Ninus, the son of Bel, who was Cush. Through an understanding of these names, Hislop traced the Babylonian conspiracy to Ham, which, according to the Egyptian system of paganism, was Hermes, the origin of the Hermetic mysteries. Hislop asserts, he says, Hermes was the great original prophet of idolatry, for he was recognized by the pagans as the author of their religious rites and the interpreter of the gods. And that comes from the Two Babylons, pages 25 and 26. If this is the case, then we find that Ham educated Cush by the name of Bel. And Bel, who was Cush, being indoctrinated by Satan's system, founded the city of Babylon, and Nimrod built the city. If Ham, the father of Cush and the grandfather of Nimrod, is truly Hermes, we find that the great satanic conspiracy promulgated through the pagan kingdoms began with him. How is this the case? Notice what Hislop says in the following. He says, if the Egyptians and Greeks derived their arithmetic and astronomy from Chaldea, seeing these in Chaldea were sacred sciences and monopolized by the priest, that is sufficient evidence that they must have derived their religion from the same quarter. Hislop then says, the zodiacal signs show unequivocally that the Greeks derived their notions and arrangements of the zodiac, and consequently their mythology that was intertwined with it, from the Chaldeans. And these quotations come from the Two Babylons, pages 12 and 13. In other words, the zodiac, with all the related ideas that were found in Egypt and Greece, are traced back to the Chaldeans, and the Chaldeans is just another title or name for the Babylonians. Now, what does this have to do with Ham? The sciences that Hislop equates to the Chaldean system, the pagan scholar and 33rd degree Freemason Manly P. Hall attributes to Hermes as the architectures of these sciences. Here's what Manly P. Hall says. Among the arts and sciences which it is affirmed Hermes revealed to mankind were medicine, chemistry, law, art, astrology, music, rhetoric, magic, philosophy, geography, mathematics, especially geometry, anatomy, and oratory. And that comes from the Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 37.
In other words, D.S., the sciences that came from the Chaldeans have been attributed to Hermes. This means that the Egyptian Hermes really existed before the time frame of the Egyptian Empire. This takes us back to the time of the Tower of Babel, or even before Babel.
That is factual, and let me add this point. The sciences that came from the Chaldeans have shaped the ideologies of the 7 successive kingdoms. If Hermes is the root of the pervasive ideology within the 7 kingdoms, then Hermes and the system of Hermeticism become the focal point of ascertaining the origin and meaning of Satan's religious system. Harry Ironside tells us that Ham was the one who brought into being the idolatry which Nimrod so largely established. Notice what he says here. He says, Nimrod, or Nimrod bar Cush, was a grandson of Ham, the unworthy son of Noah. Noah had brought through the flood the revelation of the true God. Ham, on the other hand, seems to have been all too readily affected by the apostasy that brought the flood, for he shows no evidence of self-judgment. His name means swarthy, darkened, or more literally, the sunburnt. And the name indicates the state of the man's soul, darkened by light from heaven. And this comes from Lectures on the Book of Revelation, pages 287 through 291. Now, the preceding statement from Ironside shows that Ham was darkened by light from heaven. We can say that Ironside was absolutely correct in stating this, and we will further elaborate on this point by raising the question, what was the light from heaven that darkened Ham? It has been said that Hermes had a vision of something splendid, something that revealed to him all the knowledge that he is accredited to giving the world. Hall demonstrates that Hermes saw, quote, the great dragon with wings stretching across the sky, and light streaming in all directions from its body, end of quote. Hall continues, he says, the mysteries taught that the universal life was personified as a dragon. The great dragon called Hermes by name and asked him why he thus meditated upon the world mystery. Terrified by the spectacle, Hermes prostrated himself before the dragon, beseeching it to reveal its identity. The great creature answered that it was Poimandres, the mind of the universe, the creative intelligence, and the absolute emperor of all. And this comes from the Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 38. It is said that Poimandres, meaning the name of this great dragon in the Hermetic mysteries, it is said that Poimandres revealed himself to Hermes as a pulsating radiance. And Hall says on page 38, this light was the spiritual nature of the great dragon itself. Now, there are two things that we should immediately notice about this vision. Number one, Revelation 12 identifies Satan as a great red dragon. Number two, that the radiance of this dragon corresponds to the meaning of the name Lucifer. Notice Isaiah 14, 12 through 14. We read, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Now notice that Lucifer in the Hebrew here is Halel, and it means light bearer or shining one. And son of the morning is Shachar, and it means dawn, son of dawn. His name actually means light bearer or son of dawn. Note this clearly. Understanding these 2 points, the points that we just noted above about Revelation 12, identifying Satan as the great dragon, and that the radiance of the dragon corresponds to the meaning of the name Lucifer, understanding those 2 points leads us to the conclusion that the dragon which Hermes saw in the Hermetic vision was Satan. So when Ironside said that Ham was darkened by light from heaven, or that he was the sunburnt, this points to the great radiant dragon of the Hermetic vision. Thus, the fallen angel Lucifer darkened Ham, and the Tower of Babel was an attempt to unite the world to worship Lucifer.
It appears to me that the Hermetic vision is similar to what happened in Eden. The serpent came to Eve and deceived her with its beauty and intelligence. If Ham is Hermes, then this means that right after the flood, the devil deceived Ham as a winged serpent. I have to say that I'm also seeing a pattern in which the devil is attempting to replace God as the light of the universe.
That was well said. The devil, right after the flood, was attempting to replace God in every way. Notice that the dragon told Hermes that he was the mind of the universe, the creative intelligence. This correlates well with Isaiah 14, 12 through 14, where Satan said, I will be like the Most High. Satan revealed himself to Hermes as the light and eternal mind of the universe. But let us pause here. Who is the light of the universe? Notice the words of the psalmist. Psalm 36, verse 9 says, For with you is the fountain of life. In your light shall we see light. Notice Psalm 104, verses 1 and 2. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with honor and majesty. 2, who cover yourself with light as with a garment, who stretched out the heavens like a curtain. Notice John 8, verse 12. Then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. Who is the light of the world? Jesus says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Who is the light of the universe? The God of the Bible is. Therefore, back in the land of the Chaldeans, on the plains of Shinar in Mesopotamia, we find that Satan was attempting to replace God as the true light. One of the ways in which Satan deceived people into worshiping him as the light was through sun worship. As we are going to see, the sun is synonymous with the symbol of the dragon or the serpent. Alexander Hislop tells us the following: along with the sun as the great fire god, and in due time identified with him, was the serpent worshipped. In the mythology of the primitive world, the serpent is universally the symbol of the sun. And that comes from the Two Babylons, page 227. In other words, the dragon that radiated with light in the presence of Ham, which claimed to be the mind of the universe, is represented to the pagans of all ages as the visible sun. Let us underscore this statement. The dragon that radiated with light in the presence of Ham is represented to the pagans of all ages as the visible sun.
This is interesting. As you pointed out earlier, scriptures such as Malachi 4:2 and Psalms 84:11 use the sun in a symbolic way to represent God. It's clear that God is to be worshipped directly, and in these scriptures, the sun was used only symbolically to represent God's brightness and glory. It's apparent in the Hermetic vision that the devil is attempting to be like God with the sun allegory. The difference lies in the fact that with the devil, we see him directing people to worship the sun and the symbol of the serpent.
Mike, it has always been the studied aim of Satan to be like the Most High, and Satan used the solar orb, the sun, to gain worship. The New Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology demonstrates how ancient Babylon applied the attributes of Jehovah to the sun. They say the following: during the night Shamash pursues his subterranean course, so that before dawn he shall have regained the mountain of the east. Vigor and courage were the distinctive qualities of this god, who triumphed over the night and put the winter to flight. But above all, he was the god of justice. His bursting light, which chased away the shadows where crime throve, made him the terror of the evildoer. He breaks the horn of him who meditates evil. How could one escape him? Not only did he see everything, but his rays were a vast net which caught all who committed iniquities. Thus he bore the title of Judge of the heavens and the earth, Sublime Judge, Lord of judgment. His temple in Babylon was called the House of the Judge of the world. In his role of judge, the god was represented seated on a throne, holding in his right hand the scepter and the ring. And this comes from the New Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology, the 1968 edition, the Assyrio-Babylonian Mythology section, written by F. Garand, pages 57 and 58.
Wow. The sun god of Babylon was said to be the judge of the heavens and the earth, who sees everything. How else has the devil attempted to be like the Most High?
Let me show you. What does the New Testament teach about the Godhead?
The New Testament reveals that the Godhead is made up of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
That's right. Now, the great serpent dragon was also believed to be a three-part being. Concerning the great dragon, Hall says, the supreme being, the mind, male and female, brought forth the word. Suspended between light and darkness, was delivered of another mind called the workman, the master builder, or the maker of things. And that comes from the Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 39. In other words, the dragon is said to have been the mind that brought forth the Word, who is the Son of God. The Son of God is said to be reason, which is the offspring of thought. So mind, meaning thought, brought forth the Word, which is reason. Now, in looking at the Hermetic vision, it becomes clear that the first part of the dragon trinity, the mind, is both male and female, who brought forth the second part, the word, and then another mind called the master builder or maker of things was brought forth. This third part of the dragon trinity is also called the son of striving, and he is represented as fire. And this information comes from the Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 39. Now, in looking at this third part of the dragon trinity, being fire, it is well worth looking at the words of Hislop in the following. He says, the serpent of fire in the plains of Shinar seems to have been the grand object of worship. There is the strongest evidence that the apostasy among the sons of Noah began in fire worship, and that in connection with a symbol of the serpent. And this comes from the Two Babylons, page 226.
Yes, that last section of the Hermetic vision sounds a lot like John 1, where it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
This similarity has led into different kinds of propositions. such as the following. 1, that the so-called Hermetic vision was written after the life of Jesus, and 2, that the dragon is the same God as Jehovah. Let me comment on the first proposition. It makes no difference if the Hermetic vision was written before or after Christ, because this story, when correlated with the ancient paganism in Mesopotamia, is in agreement with that ancient system. When we connect all the dots in history, it is apparent that Ham, meaning the sunburnt or darkened by light from heaven, had an experience that led his grandson Nimrod to build the Tower of Babel. It is clear that at some point in history, there was an episode that gave birth to the system of paganism. As far as the second proposition is concerned, those scholars who believe that the dragon and Jehovah are the same based on the similarities that we have been looking at do not comprehend the warfare between good and evil and how the devil seeks to copy God and to deceive the world by looking just like God. They haven't comprehended how the devil does his work. The very fact that Isaiah says that he wants to be like the Most High.
I agree with you completely, Dia.
Now let us continue with the present issue of the dragon trinity. The fact that the dragon was viewed as a trinity can also be realized in the trinity of the sun. Remember, the sun was believed to be the greatest representation of the dragon. This can be visualized in the pagan concept of 3 suns. The mystical pagans believed that in each solar system there were 3 suns: the spiritual sun, the intellectual sun, and the material sun. And the pagans believed that these 3 suns corresponded with the 3 parts of man: spirit, soul, and body. Hall tells us the following. Man's nature was divided by the mystics into 3 distinct parts: spirit, soul, and body. His physical body was unfolded and vitalized by the material sun. His spiritual nature was illuminated by the spiritual sun, and his intellectual nature was redeemed by the true light of grace, the solar sun. And that comes from the Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 51. The Hermetic vision of the radiant dragon being made up of mind, word, and fire correlates well with the 3 suns. As the terms given to the Hermetic dragon have been applied to Jehovah, Hall shows how the 3 suns have also been applied to Jehovah, where he says, the spiritual sun manifests the power of God the Father, the solar sun radiates the life of God the Son, and the material sun is the vehicle of manifestation for God the Holy Spirit. And that comes from the Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 51. Now, is the Hermetic dragon or the sun the same God as Jehovah? No, it has always been the aim of the devil to be like the Most High.
Once again, I must say, wow, how much more did the devil attempt to be like the Most High?
In the book of Revelation, we have the 7 churches, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 last plagues. God works in 7s. Moreover, according to Revelation 1:20, Revelation 8:2, and Revelation 15:6, God has 7 angels who work his purpose. On this point, Satan emulated God in the land of Shinar. In paganism, it is believed that the 3rd part of the dragon trinity, meaning the son of striving or fire, brought forth 7 other governors of the world. Hall says the following. The son of striving thus formed 7 governors, the spirits of the planets, whose orbits bounded the world, and the 7 governors controlled the world by the mysterious power called destiny, given them by the fiery workmen. And that is the Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 39. In this demonstration, we have in sight what became the 7 astrological gods in pagan idolatry: the Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. Note this clearly. In the ancient paganism, the dragon was represented through the 7 planetary gods. When Nimrod built the Tower of Babel, he built that tower in dedication to the great dragon which his grandfather Ham had seen. Let us ask, is it possible that Nimrod built that tower with 7 layers to represent the 7 planetary gods? This is a possibility because the Babylonians built ziggurats in accordance with the grand design of the Tower of Babel. Now, concerning the great ziggurat, congruous with the Tower of Babel in ancient Babylon, Will Durant tells us the following. The great ziggurat at Borsippa was called the Stages of the Seven Spheres. Each story was dedicated to one of the 7 planets known to Babylonia and bore a symbolic color. The lowest was black as the color of Saturn. The next above it was white as the color of Venus. The next was purple for Jupiter. The 4th blue for Mercury. The 5th scarlet for Mars. The 6th silver for the Moon. The 7th gold for the Sun. These spheres and stars beginning at the top designated the days of the week. And that comes from Our Oriental Heritage, page 255. The 7 layers of the ziggurat were built in dedication to the great dragon. We agree with Hall where he asserts, the Tower of Babel, which according to the Scriptures was built so that man might reach up to God, was probably an astronomical observatory, and that's the Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 49. Durant tells us, he says, every planet was a god. Jupiter was Marduk, Mercury was Nabu, Mars was Nergal, the sun was Shamash, the moon was Sin, Saturn was Ninus, Venus was Ishtar, and that comes from Our Oriental Heritage, page 256.
DS, now it is apparent why the dragon of Revelation 12 represents paganism. The whole idea of a 7-headed dragon has its beginnings with the worship of the 7 planetary gods. In other words, when people worshiped the 7 planets, they were worshiping the dragon. It's also apparent that astrology and sun worship began with the worship of the 7 planetary gods.
That is absolutely correct. This is the reason why the dragon of Revelation 12 represents the system of paganism, along with the other interpretations that we mentioned earlier. Mike, when you said that astrology has its beginnings with the 7 planetary gods, that is true. The 7 gods of Babylon gave rise to the belief that there were many gods. Hall says, the pagans looked upon the stars as living things, capable of influencing the destinies of individuals, nations, and races, and that is the Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 53. Durant says, like the sun and the moon, every star contained was a god and moved at the command of its indwelling spirit. All these marvelous bodies were not mere bodies. They were the external forms of mighty spirits, gods whose wills, not always concordant, ordained their complex and varied movements. And that comes from Our Oriental Heritage, page 60 and 198. Note this clearly. In the vision of Hermes, we see the revelation of Satan bringing the worship of astrology to the human race. Different scholars on the history of the ancient civilizations inadvertently tell us that this is the case. Maurice Cottrell says the following. In the super-gods, it became clear that superior beings visited Earth, teaching mankind the higher order of science and spirituality. These were the super-gods. They were not from this planet, although where they were from is unclear. What is clear is their relationship to the living God who created the earth and the heavens. They were one and the same, and that comes from the Tutankhamun Prophecies, page 19. Now, Cottrell, of course, believes that the super gods were beings of goodwill, and in the book, The Tutankhamun Prophecies, Cottrell tells the following story. Notice the story that Cottrell says. This is a true story about a boy king born through an immaculate conception on the banks of the Nile more than 3,000 years ago. He taught his people the super science of the sun, worshipped the sun as the god of fertility, and performed miracles. When he died, they say he went to the stars. They called him the feathered snake. But first, I need to tell you about the boy king of Mexico. He too was born through an immaculate conception more than 1,250 years ago in the jungle of Mexico. He taught his people the super science of the sun, worshipped the sun as the god of fertility, and performed miracles. When he died, they say he went to the stars. They called him the feathered snake. And this comes from the Tutankhamun Prophecies, page 1. In other words, this book describes 2 super gods that each visited different parts of the world at different times. And these beings taught the super science of the sun and were known as feathered snakes. It is our belief that the so-called super gods were fallen angels who deceived mankind. The super science of the sun and the feathered snake all point back to the great Hermetic dragon. What is amazing about books such as the one above is that there is evidence to prove that much of what the ancients believed came from beings outside of planet Earth. When this information is tied into the biblical account of the great controversy between good and evil, then it becomes clear that truly the ancients were visited by Lucifer and his angels.
That is truly some powerful stuff right there. What amazes me is the fact that pagan writers oftentimes will inadvertently lead to the same conclusions that we come to, while so many Christians miss these marks by thousands of miles. Truly, many in the Christian world are in a state of myopia.
Now, before we run out of time, I am going to summarize what we have studied up to this point. Revelation 12 is a chapter that symbolically represents the great controversy between good and evil. Man's part in the controversy began in Eden with the serpent. The woman of Revelation 12 is inclusive of God's people from Adam to the last person to be saved. Though the woman is inclusive of the saints in the antediluvian time frame, this symbol became focalized in ancient Israel and the church. Said another way, in the Old Testament, the woman is predicated to ancient Israel and the saints that came prior to Israel. In the New Testament, the woman is predicated to the church. The dragon represents the warfare of Satan that he has waged on God's people. We emphasized 4 interpretations of the dragon. 1. The dragon represents the 7 successive pagan empires which have persecuted both Israel and the church. 2. The dragon represents pagan Rome itself, especially as the prophecy speaks of the man-child. 3. The dragon represents the papacy, as the prophecy speaks of the woman fleeing for her life for the period of 1260 years. And 4. The dragon represents the system of astrology and sun worship, the very system which filled the 7 successive kingdoms. The system of paganism itself is very important because it reveals the religion of the fallen cherub Lucifer. Thus far in our study, we have seen that, like in Eden, the serpent manifested himself in the days of Nimrod, or even prior, to establish his false religion. In the system of astrology and sun worship, it becomes clear that Satan is attempting to be like God. The devil established the worship of the 7 astrological gods. The chief god of the 7 was the sun. Both the sun and the dragon are synonymous, and they were viewed as a trinity. The name that has been predicated to this ancient system is Hermeticism.
DS, what are we going to study next week?
We are going to continue our study of the system of the dragon. We are going to find out that 666 was a very important number in the system of sun worship. Moreover, we are going to discover how the system of the dragon and the number 666 have become concentrated in the 7th kingdom, which is the papacy.
Okay, that's next week on Hearing the Truth Radio. D.S. Ferris, thanks for the lesson. We'll see you next week.
Well, Mike, I enjoyed our visit, and I enjoyed our study on this topic. Next week, I look forward to going into more detail on these issues. So until then, God be with everyone. See you later.
Check out DS's book, Prophetic Tool Chest, on the internet at www.prophetictoolchest.brayfolks.com. And come back next Sabbath day for another lesson on the system of the Antichrist. We'll be learning more on the system of the dragon. Take care, read the Bible, and hear the truth. So long.
Close the door to be sure as I take a new direction. I leave behind my former ways and cast aside this world's affections. And I won't think twice because your love healed my broken heart now. And your love brought me a brand new start. Oh, a brand new start, yeah. And I'm never going back no way, yeah. The wisdom of the cross is foolish to the one who won't receive it. Well, are just the same to all who will believe it. I believe it because your love healed my broken heart now, and your love on me a brand new start, oh, a brand new start, yeah. And I'm never going back no way, yeah. Never going back to that old place. Never going back. Since my past has been erased. Never going back. In His grace I will